Order. Welcome back to the Environmental Audit Committee for our fourth and final panel of the day on the issue of water quality. We're pleased to welcome Robbie Moore, Member of Parliament and relatively recently appointed Minister for the Environment covering water, and he's joined by David Hallam, who's the Director of Floods and Water in DEFRA. Minister, you will have heard on the radio this morning, as did we, the very unwelcome news of the very significant spillage of sewage into Lake Windermere, seemingly undetected by the water company or by the Environment Agency for a number of hours. How do you react to such news reports, given your present role, and what are you trying to do to get on top of this issue?
Well, I think the first thing to say is this is a completely unsatisfactory situation, and I would expect a full investigation to be carried out, as is the case. I've spoken with my Environment Agency colleagues today, specifically from hearing the news on this, and also had a call with the Chief Executive of United Utilities as well to get her undertaking of this. But there is an investigation that is happening as we speak, so therefore it would be inappropriate for me to comment any further specifically whilst that investigation is happening. But what I would absolutely expect is, once that investigation is concluded, if there is, as may come to light, wrongdoing in this case, I'd expect the Environment Agency, as the regulator and the enforcer, to carry out their absolute obligations as that regulator and that enforcer, and carry out appropriate penalties, fines, whatever it may be, on the back of what's happened.
There are currently over 2,000 instances of alleged permit abuse by water companies, by 6 water companies, and we've heard from the regulator they've issued an interim advice note to 3 of them. Are you able to give any sense of whether we can expect a whole lot more coming down the track? Are other water companies who have not been investigated likely to be for other similar permit breaches? You just mentioned this may be a permit breach. We don't know yet. But how are you trying to get on top of that in your departmental role?
Well, as I've said, with regards to Windermere, there is an ongoing investigation with that, so I think it's fair to let that investigation happen. But what I can absolutely reassure you and the committee is that on a rolling basis, I meet with the chief executives of all of the water companies in my office, and we go through performance-related metrics. We look at things like pollution incidences, we look at service interruptions, we look at financial standing of water companies, and I question them and hold them to account, and that builds on the work that not only I am doing with my officials within DEFRA, but also the expectations that I would be anticipating the regulators to be undertaking, as in the Environment Agency and also Ofwat in their respective regulatory roles.
We've heard from Water UK that the industry is looking to commit up to £100 billion through the 5-year business plans currently being considered by Ofwat, and that's close to double the previous 5-year period of investment, much of which is going into water treatment, but also covering their other responsibilities. To what extent do you attribute that increase in investment to public pressure, to government pressure to change, or to regulatory pressure to stop this from happening, stop the spillages from happening?
Well, our expectation on water companies is absolutely to enhance their asset base where they have ageing assets, and also deal with, quite rightly, the challenges associated with storm overflows and pollution instances, as we would quite rightly expect. And this builds into not only the legislation that we brought out with the Environment Act, but also our plan for water, which is all about more investment within the sector, stronger regulation and tougher enforcement. And part of that more investment, we have seen over plans approximately £100 billion that are being allocated by water companies through the price review of 24, which is currently being scrutinised by Ofwat. That process is taking place as we speak, as you would have heard from Ofwat, as I'm sure. And there is an expectation that that specifically addresses some of the pollution incidences which are taking place, of which my understanding is, of that £100 billion that has been put forward collectively by water companies, approximately £39 billion of approximately £10 billion of that is specifically to relate to storm overflow improvements.
We heard that from the Rivers Trust that currently 16% of rivers achieve good ecological status. The target under the Water Framework Directive been taken through through the Environment Act is to achieve 77% by 2027, which is only 3 years away. We're not going to make it, are we?
It's absolutely our ambition to make sure that we're getting and reaching that 75% target. It is worth noting that the data sets that the OEP looked at were from 2019, and we have made significant improvements at the speed in which we're wanting to roll out our plan for water to ensure that as a government we are putting ourselves in as best position as possible to meet that requirement. It is right to say from those 2019 figures, 16% of rivers were at that good ecological status. And just looking at how those measurables work, there are 21 tests that are associated with good ecological status, looking at everything from specific pollutants, from arsenic, copper, manganese, zinc, right the way to fish, how river systems work. And of course, if there is one element of those 21 tests that doesn't necessarily meet good, then all of those tests effectively sit at the measurable below, which would in this case be moderate. So we know that because it's all in, or if one of those tests is not met, all of them effectively fail. And we know that 20% of those that are rated moderate at the moment, just one of those is just holding all of those 20% from reaching that good status. But nevertheless, we are aware of that and we are dealing with it, which is why through our plan for water, we've rolled out a strategy which is focusing on more investment, stronger regulation and tougher enforcement. And if I may, Chair, I just want to reiterate some of the key measurables that we've put in place since 2019. We've announced a action plan specifically for the River Wye, which was £35 million that's been allocated. We have specifically said that all fines and penalties that are collected from water companies now are ring-fenced through the Water Restoration Fund, which allows us that money to be specifically ring-fenced back into improving water quality measures. We've announced £11.5 billion through 180 catchment-based projects, and also dealing with some of the agricultural challenges, phosphorus or nitrate, allocating £75 million to improve slurry infrastructure. But we will not hold back in holding those to account who pollute, which is why we have removed the cap on penalties from 250,000 to an unlimited amount, and that money that is now collected gets reinvested through the Water Restoration Fund. We've quadrupled Environment Agency inspections. We have given the Environment Agency more money, and we are allocating 200 staff to specifically carry out inspections and have more of a relationship with water companies in terms of holding them account and making sure that they're meeting their requirements. We've announced a whistleblowing portal, and we've also increased the amount of monitoring that we're doing from 7% of storm overflows in 2010 to 100% now, which gives us an ability as a government to understand where we allocate resource. And we have specifically said to water company bosses, if there is a serious criminal breach, they will not be able to receive bonuses. And we have also stipulated to Ofwat that dividends must be related to environmental performance. And as you may know, Chair, £150 million has been collected in fines and penalties from water companies since 2015.
Thank you. We've heard in previous evidence that some of the event duration monitor data is extremely unreliable, and we don't have the facts and figures about that yet, but hopefully that will be forthcoming, and we will want to draw that to your officials' attention, because even if I accept 100% of EDMs are now in place, but if they're not working, then it's difficult to claim that we've got 100% coverage. I'm going to move on to, we talk about, you touched on agriculture. I think Chris Chope has got some comments on agriculture.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, the DEFRA announced in January that it was designating catchment areas where wastewater works must be updated. And in the policy paper accompanying that announcement, there was a commitment to complete a limited exemption process by the 1st of April this year. That didn't happen. It hasn't happened. I raised it at a meeting with you. You recently wrote to me, I think on the 9th of May, saying an announcement was imminent. Why has the announcement still not been made?
Well, I'll bring David in as my official, but I want to reassure you, as I hope I have done at previous meetings that we've had, is that we are working at speed to try and make sure that those announcements can get made at the earliest opportunity. David?
Just to add that we are moving as fast as we can to finalise that list. We have designated all the sites, so now it's a question of finalising the list, given that some companies did ask for exemptions, and that will be in a few weeks. Chair, could I just pick up on your point about the event duration monitors? Because I don't know what you've been told, because I wasn't in the room.
You can read the transcript.
I will. I look forward to it. There are some alternative facts put around the reliability of the monitors, but the fact is that 86.5% of monitors operated for more than 90% of the time last year. So the vast majority of monitors are operating properly and all the time.
Well, this was a specific allegation in relation to analysis of information provided by one of the water companies, which suggested that only 55%, I think it was the figure over the period that was being considered, were actually operable. So I think you'll need to look at that before you seek to contradict it. Back to Chris.
Mr. Hallam's answer to my question is most unsatisfactory, because the Minister has just written to me saying the announcement is imminent. You've referred to several weeks before the announcement. The commitment was originally for the 1st of April. I was told then by officials that the reason it couldn't be announced before the 2nd of May was because of purdah around the local elections. The local elections are behind us, and now we're being told that there's yet more delay coming down. Do you not realise that the impact of this delay is having upon all those people who are concerned about investment in wastewater treatment plants?
Yeah, and so, Christopher, I want to reassure you and the rest of the committee that there were challenges, as unfortunately is the case when local elections are taking place and mayoral elections, that the purdah period kicks in. I want to reassure you that, and the rest of the committee, that there will be a work being done at speed to make sure that announcement is imminent, and we will ensure that I, in my ministerial role, working with my officials, will make sure that that is absolutely the case.
So will it be before the Whitsun recess?
Well, as I say...
well, surely anything after the Whitsun recess is not going to be imminent.
No.
And it wouldn't have been imminent on the 9th of May either, would it?
No. And what, again, just coming back, I want to reassure you and the rest of the committee that we are working at speed to make sure that announcement can be made imminently.
So will it be before?
I would absolutely hope that is the case.
You're in charge, yes. Aren't you in charge?
I absolutely can assure you that it will be made imminently, that announcement. And if Whitsun recess is waiting far too long, imminently is the answer.
And can I ask you specifically about the River Avon? Because one of the consequences of the attempt to try and mitigate phosphates in the river is that you can buy phosphate credits. But phosphate credits vary in price significantly, depending upon the location in that particular river catchment. And for technical reasons, people who want to buy phosphate credits in my constituency in Christchurch have to pay 8 times as much for those phosphate credits as if they are up the river at, say, Fordingbridge, further up the river. Why is that? How is that tolerable? And how does it fit in with the government's policy?
Well, what we are absolutely keen to explore is where there are challenges within different river catchments, within the same river catchment, those challenges are being presented, and the price of the units are changing within that specific area. We want to make sure that there is consistency across the approach in the way that policy is rolled out and being applied to the market.
So why are some phosphate credits more expensive than others? Surely we're talking about the need to reduce phosphorus, and why should some phosphorus be more expensive than other bits?
Well, again, I will let David come in if he wants to comment, but there will be external market conditions that relate to the environmental benefit that is attached and associated with certain credits that are encompassed within the catchment environment. But certainly from a policy point of view, we want to make sure that there is consistency that is rolled out within each catchment area where this applies.
Do you want to say something more about
I'm
this?
going to say to offer to write to you an explanation of that because I don't have the details of that scheme.
Okay, so another cop-out. But can I just ask you this? Why wasn't the River Avon chosen for an action plan, and why was the River Wye chosen instead?
So there are particular challenging circumstances with regards to the River Wye, which I can go into. That was an announcement that we made where £35 million has been allocated to the River Wye Action Plan. We are, as a department, looking at additional catchments that we can roll out similar types of schemes based on the challenges that exist within other catchments. Each catchment, as you'll appreciate, is different in terms of the phosphorus or nitrate challenges. Others and further announcements will be forthcoming in due course about additional catchments that will be specifically looking
a quick
at.
final one. You talk about the environmental benefits of all these policies. Do you see it as an environmental benefit that there are houses in my constituency which are ready to occupy the applications for bin store approval is being made to the local authority. The local authority says they can't approve the bin stores until, in respect of each unit, you've paid £40,000 for phosphate credits. Is that really environmentally sensible to keep houses empty in these circumstances?
Well, I mean, again, I know that we've had specific conversation about this in regards to your constituency. Again, I'm more than happy to meet with you in regards to the specific challenges that you're facing in your constituency and provide further explanation. But this is something that needs to be considered alongside DEFRA and also DLUC colleagues, which we are working closely with to make sure that we get the strategy right, so we can unlock houses that either are forthcoming for development or those that are sitting empty at the moment.
Can that be imminent, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Sir Chris. Just on before we move off agriculture completely, there were, in relation to the River Wye action plan, I think you've just indicated that this is perhaps an initial plan and that other river catchments are likely to demand similar plans, and I think that your response to suggest that that's something the department's willing to consider is very welcome. One of the elements of the River Wye action plan in relation to the new money is that I think it's primarily tied into either poultry litter or slurry arrangements, and I would urge you to consider having a pool of money that's available to whoever is responsible for delivering the action plan to determine what's the best use of that money, rather than the department predetermining the best use of that money prior to completing the plan. And one of the things that is very welcome within that plan, and I speak as a farmer but not a riparian owner, is that the buffer strips around the waterways are being doubled and in some cases I think quadrupled, and farmers are getting significantly increased support for creating buffer strips. I think that is probably the single most effective way to minimise livestock pollution and runoff from phosphates which have been spread on fields. So I very much welcome that. I want to get that on the record for you. The other piece of evidence that we've just heard earlier today was one of the problems from spreading human sewage sludge, which contains microplastics and nanoparticles of plastic that have not been removed through the sewage treatment works, although we heard that 95% do get removed, that spreading such material on the land allows those particles to get washed away into the river systems and thereby into the ocean and there into the food chain. And I would urge the department to consider what needs to be done to try to encourage water companies to remove the residual plastics before consenting for material to be spread on the land. Don't expect you to comment on that. I just wanted to get that across. I'm very pleased we're joined by Selene Saxby from the EFRA Committee, who has some questions now.
Thank you and good afternoon. Very pleased to hear your announcement earlier this week about the new bathing water sites and consultation on testing. And as you know, I have a particular issue in the frequency of bathing water testing in coastal locations. And I wondered if you had any plans within the consultational review or looking at reviews to the frequency of testing and also the differentiation between freshwater and coastal, because obviously the overflows in a river environment are going to be tested upstream and downstream. But at the present time, there is no testing whatsoever when we have an overflow event in a coastal location.
Yeah, thank you, Selene. And as you'll be well aware, we've announced another 27 new bathing water sites this week, which takes the total number up to 451 in England across beaches, lakes and rivers. And I was pleased personally that there's an additional 12 rivers that have been included within the bathing water sites. And that was obviously part of the announcement, but also sitting behind the announcement in terms of new additional bathing sites were some of the reforms that we're now looking at doing to the regulations that sit with bathing waters. And I'll just run through those because I just want to provide reassurance to the committee that from the experience that I have had as a minister representing Ilkley, which has the River Wharfe in, which is the first river to be designated as a bathing water site, and having dealt and interacted with other stakeholders, we want to look at making sure that the regulations are absolutely fit for purpose from a practical perspective. So we do have river sites and beach sites that are unfortunately classified as poor, and currently, if those sites are classed as poor consistently for 5 years running, they automatically are de-designated. We want to look at changing that so that automatic de-designation does not take place, so that we can ensure that we are holding those polluters or making sure that the resource goes into ensuring that the quality is significantly improved, and that will take longer than that 5-year period. We're also looking at reviewing the period in which bathing water applies. At the moment it's from the 15th of May to the 30th of September, and we're wanting to look at widening that potentially beyond that to better suit the usage at those bathing sites, because I know that you're a keen surfer and I suspect that you surf beyond those bathing periods, and also looking at the number of monitoring sites that we have at each designated site. At the moment it's just one in a specific location, and we're wanting to look at whether it's reasonable to have more than one monitoring point at each bathing water site as well. And the other thing that wanting to do is, maybe picking up on your point, is looking at taking into account water quality before a bathing water is designated. At the moment it is simply based on usage, and I think it would be far more reasonable and actually far more practical if we had a better understanding of the water quality before a designation is implemented. And that is actually so that we can get as good a plan in place to make sure that the water quality is improved from whether it's poor to sufficient or even from good to excellent as part of that process.
So the point I was making with regards to frequency of testing, was delighted that we might be able to extend the Victorian bathing water season to the actual swimming season, and the actual issues around frequency of testing. So at the moment it's tested once a week and the data is released a week after, but if you have an overflow event at the weekend, we have this situation whereby the Environment Agency then say that water is safe to go into after one tidal rotation, yet Surfers Against Sewage say it's 48 hours. And this inconsistency of data and the safety, we've had evidence this afternoon at the risk of somebody is going to die in one of our rivers. Now, I feel there is a real need. I recognise that this is now confusion between DEFRA and DCMS because it's for the usage of the water as opposed to the quality, but they rely on your data. What are we actually going to do to start testing frequently enough so that people can know it is safe to go in the water?
Well, what we're absolutely wanting to ensure is that data is being collected and from these specific designated sites, that the Environment Agency is getting that information out there to the users as much as possible through SwimFo, and having as real-time information being put out there as it is specifically in relation to bathing water sites at the moment. But I know that you put forward that 10-minute rule bill earlier this week, which one of those points that you raised specifically about the different challenges of different types of pollution. And again, as I've committed to already to you, more than happy to have that further discussion with you. But David, I don't know if you wanted to comment further on the types of pollution instances that Selene is referring to.
I will just add, Minister, if I might. I'm a keen outdoor swimmer myself, so I recognise the concerns. The chair of the Environment Agency and the chief executive gave evidence to this committee and were asked the same question, in fact, and they pointed to the modelling that they do and that they feel it's good, and it does provide a real-time forecast of what the pollution is likely to be, and they don't necessarily agree with the surface against sewage approach, which is just to say a blanket, it will be for the next 48 hours. But they did say as well that they're very committed to continuing to improve the monitoring and the modelling so that it's as good as it can possibly be to give bathers and other recreational users the best possible information.
In a user-friendly format, I hope, when we get there, because I think that is the challenge, is that the data is very embedded in the Environment Agency website. Whilst it's very detailed and thorough, it's not there in a real-time app format, so that you, as you don't know if you swim regularly, it would be nice to know before you went that it was safe to go. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Selene. Matthew Offit. I'm sorry, not Matthew Offit. No, you already. Do you have something?
I do.
Yes.
I do have to correct you, Minister, that you say there's real-time in publications of swimming locations. That is simply not correct.
I was meaning actually, and sorry about that, in regards to forecasting that the Environment Agency are putting out there.
Because the system as it currently stands means that the Environment Agency have no legal requirement to advertise what the condition of the bathing is. It's actually a requirement for the local authority who decide that they are not going to get involved in that political argument. And the outbreak on Harlem Beach last year, that Minister Powell was certainly aware of, because the two of us were in there. We know how the system actually works on the ground. But you say that you don't have any plans, you said you do have plans to change the testing. Some of us have been frustrated for many years when we've heard minister after minister to tell us that bathing water quality is getting better in this country. But the system that you use to test the water is in many ways redundant. So you did say that today is the first day of the bathing water season today. So happy bathing water season. So that means that the last 226 days there's been no monitoring at any location across the United Kingdom. And the bathing water season is only 139 days long. Now, you quite rightly say that the water is analysed and it's measured against the previous 4 years, and that means that you can then designate a bathing water location. But where Selene actually was incorrect as well, the Environment Agency are required to take up to 20 samples. They don't always do that. In some locations, they only do it 5 times a year. And so that means over a 4-year period, they may have tested the water just 30 times. So if you bathe all year round, that's probably 2% testing of when you swim. So when will you actually make changes? Now we've left the European Union. I'm very aware of the EEC 76160 Bathing Water Directive intimately. When are we going to make changes to the Bathing Water Directive so it's fit for purpose?
So, as part of the announcement that was made this week, we are looking at specifically those reforms, specifically, as I was saying, in response to Selene, in regards to the dates. So, at the moment, you're quite right that bathing water period is from the 15th of May to the 30th of September. We are, as part of this week's announcements, wanting to look at reviewing that and making it better suited to usage. We know that people are using bathing water sites sometimes throughout the year and sometimes beyond those dates, and therefore, in my view, the bathing period in which the monitoring takes place needs to better reflect that, and therefore that's why we have announced that as part of this week's announcements. In terms of the quality of our bathing water sites, they have improved since 2010. So in 2010, 76% of those sites were rated good or excellent. Last year, that was increased to 90%, and that is despite in 2015 the regulations getting tighter tighter and more stringent. We still managed to make sure that bathing water sites that were classified as good or excellent improved to 90%. And as at 2023, 96% of all bathing water sites were classified as being sufficient. So the water quality overall has improved, but as part of the reforms that we've announced this week, we are wanting to look at providing more flexibility to the dates associated with them. And also, what I didn't mention just in response to Selene, was looking at also the definition of bathers. Because at the moment, the regulations relate to if you're effectively swimming, but we know that people are paddleboarding, kayaking, canoeing or surfing. And therefore, because the regulations at the moment work based on effectively usage, which drives monitoring and investment, we want to make sure that the usage is absolutely fit for criteria, so therefore we're able to ensure that that investment and monitoring can be sufficiently put in place. And the final point that you mentioned there was in relation to the amount of times which the Environment Agency are monitoring these sites. Well, I can absolutely confirm to everybody that whether a bathing water site is classified as excellent, good, poor, sufficient, that the Environment Agency is absolutely meeting their statutory requirements under the bathing water regulations in terms of the amount of monitoring that they're carrying out. In fact, they at the moment are averaging 3 times more than what they're actually statutorily obligated to do in terms of the amount of assessments that they're carrying out of the bathing water sites. And that data enables us as a government to allocate funding and hold those to pollute to account. And I will give you an example of a river system that I know very well in my own constituency, the River Wharfe in Ilkley, which has a designation of poor. But because it has been designated, we've been able to push Yorkshire Water to put a significant amount of investment into Ilkley. £15 million that they've spent recently in terms of upgrading the capacity within the sewage treatment process, and allocating another, I believe, £38,000 in addition to the sewage treatment work. So having this data enables us to be able to not only carry out the monitoring, but ensure that the investment is put there to demonstrate that the improvement in water quality can also be followed through.
Congratulations. You've just repeated everything I've heard in my 14 years of being a Member of Parliament about bathing water quality. And you fill me with no confidence.
Well, hopefully...
It's just incredible that you come along. There are simple ways of getting around the Bathing Water Directive, as I know, and I'm sure you probably know as well. And that is you determine when you take that sample. You can take it at locations and at times that you know that there's no overflow. There's no running water through rain, for example, at times of storms, and you can ensure that the tidal stream is in the correct position so you don't get a reading that you don't like. Secondly, you can also reject a reading if you don't like it as well. And you say that they've been undertaking the number of samples that they are required to. Yes, they are. But the amount of samples they're required to take are so low, it is simply useless in taking those kind of readings.
Well, the regulations work on a basis of usage, and that's how it's been identified. And that's why I don't feel that they are fit for purpose going forward. That's why we have made this week's announcement on making sure that we are going to review those 5 points that I've gone through to make sure that the bathing regulations are enhanced to better meet the usage and meet the different types of environments that bathing water regulations are being applied for. You know, we've only just seen them being started to apply to rivers within the last few years, and we've had 12 that have been additional river systems that have been approved this year. So it's right that we get the regulations to practically work on the ground.
Okay, moving on to rivers. At the moment, under the Bathing Water Directive, there are just 2 areas that are tested: E. coli and intestinal enterococci. But that doesn't actually test for other pollutants. We've heard that there's viruses, parasites, fertilizers, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, nitrates, phosphates, plastics, fecal matter, and even radioactive substances. The tests that the Environment Agency undertake, both in the Bathing Water Directive and indeed on the rivers, don't address any of those conditions. So how can you start by addressing the risks of chemical pollutants and antimicrobial resistance when you don't know what the baseline is?
So the bathing water regulations, as you quite rightly say, specifically mandate the Environment Agency to carry out those 2 tests, and as they do, meeting their statutory requirements. What does happen under the Water Framework Directive is there are 21 tests that are associated with good ecological status, of which those 21 tests, as my understanding, covers all of the points in terms of the measurables that you've mentioned there, plus others, in addition to fish, invertebrates, even down to how the river channel has been altered through mechanical means. And those assessments are done in relation to good ecological status under the Water Framework Directive, as well as there is good chemical status that is also referenced under different tests. So there is bathing water regulations that relates to one set of tests, which are specific monitoring points where bathing water designations take place. But then in addition to that, all rivers will be looked at under the Water Framework Directive, where there are up to 21 tests that look at good ecological status.
Okay, finally, some of these new bathing sites that are on rivers are going to be downstream of sewage outlets. So we were discussing earlier about swimming in the Thames, which I did on Sunday, and it is possible to see sewage outlets. Many of them are actually illegal, but they are still there. So how are you going to impact, how are you going to mitigate some of these sewage outlets to ensure that the Thames, I hope, meets bathing water standards?
Well, we have already brought it out, made sure that all storm overflows are now monitored. It was 7% back in 2010. We're now 100% monitoring of storm overflows from last year. So having that data available to us enables the Environment Agency to do their job as the regulator and the enforcer, where permitting requirements are not being met by a water company. But it also enables us to make assessments on where the level of resource and investment needs to go in through our plan for water, which, as I've said, is all about making sure that there is more investment that is going in where pollution incidents are out there, where the pollution instances take place, and there is tougher enforcement and stronger regulation that is being brought out, which is what our plan for water is all about. In regards to bathing water sites that are downstream of storm overflow outlets, as you've referenced, that the whole purpose of which, if those new 12 river systems that have been announced this week, after the monitoring takes place, if they are designated as poor, then it will enable more investment to be specifically put in to make sure that those sewage outlet, the storm overflow outlets, are meeting the minimum, the expectation that we would expect those water companies to meet, so that we can put in plans better investment, better levels of resource, and deal with the problem to ensure that the quality of those designated bathing sites is improved.
Are you proud that we've designated 12?
Yes.
Well, the Netherlands has 33, Germany 38, Italy 73, and France 573, and you think 12 is a proud achievement?
Well, of course, we can only deal with applications that come into the department, so I am proud that, given that it was only a couple of years ago that we had the first river that was designated in my constituency on the River Wharfe, we now have 12 rivers that have been designated this week. I would encourage many more to come forward if we receive those applications based on the new reforms that we are bringing out through our regulations. But what I can say is there is a huge amount of appetite out there. We had a consultation period in which fed into the 27 bathing water sites that we announced this year. I think as a department we had about 10,000 responses to that consultation, which clearly demonstrates, quite rightly, that people care about the quality of water, which is why we have been so robust in accelerating the measurables, the resource, the investment through our plan for water, which is all about and has at its heart improving water quality.
And finally, have you ever swum in the River Ilkley?
I haven't swum in the river in Ilkley, no.
Thank you, Matthew. Well, I'd just like to place on record to the Minister that I'm proud that 3 of the 12 river systems that have secured bathing water status this week are in Shropshire, 2 on the River Severn, 1 in Shrewsbury and the other in Ironbridge, which is on the edge of my constituency, and 1 on the River Teme in Ludlow. And I'd like to pay tribute to Alison Biddulph, who led the campaign for all 3 sites, and I'd like to set down a challenge to other members of the committee to encourage campaigners in your constituencies where you've got natural bathing water sites to get them engaged, because the Ministry has responded very well, and I thank you for that. I'd also like to say that the River team, the application went in after Severn Trent decided in January of last year that it should be part of the Get River Positive scheme, in which they're investing, in the case of the River team, £7.5 million in improving their water treatment assets, and including, I believe, at least the first tertiary treatment of a wastewater treatment plant that it will be operational in this country. So one of the reasons why those of us in Parliament get engaged in campaigns to improve the quality of lives for our constituents is to make a difference, and I think this committee has made a difference, in particular, I'm pleased to say, in this issue and in my constituency and in Shropshire. And having got that off my chest, last questions from Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't think there's any doubt, Minister, that the public have a real appetite over improving the quality of our water. I don't think that's in doubt. I think what's in doubt is whether or not this is a government that can actually provide that and is providing that. Because notwithstanding the reassurances that you have tried to give the committee over the past half an hour or so, just last week the Office for Environmental Protection reported that effective evaluation programmes for both the Water Framework Directive regulations and the 2023 Environmental Improvement Plan are simply not in place, making it almost impossible to effectively scrutinise progress in improving water quality. So how does the government plan to improve progress monitoring to ensure that water quality targets are met?
Well, I can say one of my first meetings as a new minister coming into the department in November last year was with Dame Glenys in her role as chair of the OEP. And working very closely with the OEP is incredibly important. We need to make sure that that relationship is established well, and we are responding to all reports that are put out by the OEP. And we will absolutely respond within the 3-month period that we are obligated to do to the OEP's report. I think it's also worth noting that since the OEP report was done in 2019, we have, as I said, made a huge stride in wanting to accelerate what we are doing in terms of improving water quality.
I'm not talking about that OEP report. I'm talking about a report that was published just last week. So what it said in 2019, that data is not the data that is in question at the moment. So what I want to know is what you're doing in terms of both the report from last week, but also from a report that was published in January 2024, which covered the period April 2022 to March 23, where the OEP said that the scale and pace of delivery of actions is not aligned with the objective to achieve good ecological status or potential by 2027. And it said the river basin management plans indicate low confidence in achieving that. So the period in question there was between 2022 and March 2023.
And I thank you for that clarification, but my understanding is even the report that you're referring to, and I'm happy to write to you and the committee with further information, is related to data that was given to the OEP that relates to 2019. And it is important to note that not only have things changed through the plan for water that we've brought out, but what that didn't take into account is the £100 billion that's been put forward by water companies over the next price review period for the next 5 years, of which 10 billion of that specifically relates to upgrades that are anticipated over that period of time for storm overflows. Neither does it take into account all of the work that has been done through the environmental land management schemes, whether landowners have entered into sustainable farming incentives, countryside stewardship schemes or landscape recovery schemes, of which many of those schemes have options available to those landowners and agreement holders to improve water quality. And one of the big changes that has taken place since that report came out is actually the landscape recovery schemes, which is a huge shift in terms of trying to get landowners to work collaboratively together with the sole remit of improving water quality. And what I just want to say here is previously, under any agri-environmental stewardship scheme, a landowner landowner would have a direct contractual relationship with Natural England, for example, which was based on certain management options that they put in place. But if other landowners were not involved in the scheme, then that didn't necessarily improve or help to benefit as much as what one would want to see the water quality being improved within that wider catchment. So through the landscape recovery schemes, what it does encourage is landowners within that catchment area to work together collaboratively as part of an agreement in a partnership approach to improve water quality. And the OEP's report doesn't take into account quite yet those measurables in terms of improving water quality.
It seems to me that it's problematic either way, isn't it? Because if it is really the case that a report published by the OEP in January 2024 is based on data from 2019, if you're right, and I would be very grateful if you would clarify that in writing afterwards, then to be dealing with data that's 5 years out of date would suggest there's something wrong with the regulatory system that's being used, surely, because we're talking about changes that are needing to be made pretty urgently, and if we're basing that on data that's 5 years old, then how does that work?
The OEP will, of course, be carrying out another report based on 25 data, which will be obviously as up to date as it can be at that time, and that will take into account the significant improvements that we've rolled out as a government through the Plan for Water and through the environmental land management schemes. But as I say, we have a good working relationship with the OEP. We will respond to the report within the statutory timeframe that we're obligated to do as a department within that 3-month period.
Well, I'm very glad you've got a good relationship with the OEP. I'm sure you have. Glenys Stacey is a very very good person, and I'm sure that relationship is very good, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the data that we have in front of us points to the fact that the government's action is largely off track, and I'm very glad to hear you've done some work since then, but I think everything we've heard in the committee this afternoon suggests that there are big flaws in the way that the regulatory system is working. I mean, we've heard, for example, that untreated sewage has been pumped into English waterways for over 3.6 million hours last year. We had the example of the Windermere Lake. Yes, I was talking about what went into it, the effluent that went into it, the pollution, the sewage that went into Windermere for 13 hours before the Environment Agency got there. We are one of the richest countries in the world, and we can't swim in our water, and increasingly we can't even drink it without getting sick, because we've just heard today warnings in Devon that people are having to boil their drinking water after 22 cases of diarrhoea there. So I would just put it to you, can you put your hand on your heart and say that the current legislative and regulatory framework in place in England is the best available to deliver improved water quality?
Well, I absolutely can say that if you turn the clock back, we did not have the Environment Act. Now, that was a huge piece of legislation that was brought through with huge positive mechanisms that were encompassed within it, not only to enhance the regulatory format in which government was held to account in terms of the measurables that they were bringing in and their levels of investment and the objectives that we as a government wanted to achieve, but also our plan for water, which I've referred to. I've gone through the levels of investment, the stronger regulation and the tougher enforcement that we're bringing out, all of which has come into place under this administration, of which we are going forward at speed, bringing out further measures through the likes of making changes just this week to the reforms to the bathing water designations, which will help us improve and hold those who pollute to account. But we are going at speed, whether it's quadrupling our Environment Agency inspections, responding to the challenges that were quite rightly put to us that involved United Utilities through the Panorama programme. We're rolling out a whistleblower platform. We're banning wet wipes. We're improved our monitoring programme, which all gives us the data to be able to allocate resource, which not only the regulator in Ofwat will be scrutinising the £100 billion that's been allocated by water companies over the next review period, but things like us taking a catchment-wide approach through the 35 million that we're allocating to the River Wye action plan, and us wanting to go further in taking that catchment-wide approach when it comes to improving water quality.
I would simply say that if we look at the outcomes rather than the measures that you're talking about, the outcomes are still a very, very long way from the ones that we need. And I would just suggest that there is questions about that regulatory framework that still need to be addressed in order to be able to produce the kind of water that I think people in this country need and deserve.
Thank you, Caroline. Well, I think that concludes our session. This is a subject which has been focused on by the committee a great deal. I think we've heard a lot of things today which may lead us to wish to write to Minister with one or two points, not so much clarification of what you've said, but suggestions and recommendations of how progress can continue to be made in the remainder of this Parliament and beyond. Thank you for joining us today, Robbie Moore and David Hallam. Order, order. Thank you very much indeed.